Hi, I'm Luke Poon.
And I'm Basil Hariri.
And we are going to tell you today about our new audit, Growing Case Backlog Requires Reprioritization of Code Enforcement Resources. So first, let me give you a quick run through of the 4 key takeaways for this presentation. First, code enforcement has a growing backlog, and almost 1/3 of backlogged cases are priority 1, meaning they present imminent risks to safety or the environment. Second, while code enforcement has a case prioritization structure, it has not aligned its prioritization processes with available staff resources. This contributes to inefficiency and adds to the backlog. Third, lack of information and unclear communication to property owners slows processes. And fourth, current data systems are inefficient and ineffective because data entry is time-consuming and the systems do not facilitate case or program management. So now I'll walk you through the code enforcement process at a high level because it can get very long and complex. So each case begins with a complaint from a county resident, often a neighbor. Next, code enforcement reviews the complaint and sends a letter to the property owner informing them of the reported violation and requesting that they contact code enforcement. Then staff investigate the situation and assign the case high, moderate, or low priority based on the level of risk. And from there, staff begin the process of working with the property owner to resolve the code violation. Most of the time, they manage to reach compliance voluntarily, but in some cases, they have to resort to legal means, which can add a significant amount of time and complexity. So while this is the general process, cases vary greatly in severity and ease of resolution. And I'll show you some examples in the next slides here. So this aerial photo is from a case involving environmental damage. The property owner leveled out a hillside at the back of their property and filled a culvert with a creek running through it. Doing this created a potential landslide hazard. You can see logs and dirt that appear to be sliding down the slope on the right toward that blue line, which is the creek. So to reach compliance with code, this property owner would need to get a permit for site restoration to undo the damage. So in these examples show that code enforcement regularly receives complaints about what they call junk and debris, including inoperable vehicles and garbage. Reaching compliance in cases like these would simply involve removing the junked vehicle or cleaning up the property. So now that you have a sense of code enforcement's work, I'll give you a look at some data describing the challenge that they're facing. This slide is the main reason that we did this audit. It shows continual growth in code enforcement's backlog between 2015 and 2022. The red bars indicate the number of cases opened in each year, and the gray bars show the number closed. The dark red line shows the total case backlog over time. So you can see that each year, more new cases were opened than code enforcement was able to close. This means that ongoing risks to health, safety, and the environment take an incremental toll on unincorporated King County neighborhoods. I want to draw your attention to the slowdown in the backlog growth between 2020 and 2022. This flatter part of the line reflects fewer cases coming in during 2021, but also shows an increase in the number of cases closed, as you can see with this blue line. This is in part a result of managers' efforts to reduce the backlog by dismissing the lowest priority cases and trying to suspend cases without recent complaints. Unfortunately, these efforts were not effective enough to turn the tide, as the backlog is still growing. Code enforcement has recently begun to implement a new approach that I'll tell you about next. So the main reason that prior efforts to improve efficiency didn't work well enough is that prior management didn't take bold enough steps to align work processes and policies with limited staff capacity. Code enforcement recently began implementing a new plan to focus resources on the highest risk cases. In addition to creating better prioritization processes, the plan deals with low risk cases quickly by providing property owners educational materials and then closing the case. This approach is consistent with the education first policy defined in code. So policy analysts use this sphere of influence graphic you see here to describe the level of control an agency has over its operating environment. Basically, as the colors get lighter, the amount of direct control lessens. In this case, code enforcement has full control of its enforcement practices, but only influence over factors like property owner engagement and the clarity of land use codes and regulations. So to take property owner engagement as an example, while code enforcement can't force people to resolve code violations on their properties, staff do have some influence over the working relationship based on how they communicate and the enforcement approach they take. In that farthest circle, we have factors code enforcement does not control, like funding limitations and permitting timelines and costs. So long permit timelines and high costs make it more likely that property owners will choose to take actions without getting a permit, sometimes resulting in an enforcement case. These factors also extend the duration of cases that require permits to resolve. Regarding code clarity, most of the time codes are fixed. However, I put this at the influence level because King County Council asked the Department of Local Services to propose revisions to enforcement code, as well as the county's land use and development regulations to try to reduce case duration. DLS staff are currently working on a proposal and plan to deliver it to Council in September 2024. In our report, we make a related recommendation to this, that code enforcement leverage the hearing examiner's experiences adjudicating code enforcement appeals to identify parts of code that are ambiguous or inconsistent. The hearing examiner has written about some suggested improvements, particularly in regard to clearing and grading thresholds. And now I'll turn it over to Basil to tell you about some other important parts of our audit.
Thanks, Luke. So for this audit, we did extensive data analysis to look at code enforcement's case profile. On this chart, you can see data from 2015 to 2022 showing the percentages of open cases in pink, cases the property owner resolved voluntarily in darker blue, and cases resolved only after code enforcement began legal action in lighter blue. As you can see in the chart, code enforcement closed 74% of open cases through voluntary compliance and 5% more during the legal process. Code enforcement's goal is for property owners to get their property back to a code compliant state quickly without the need for legal action. In other words, the bigger the dark blue slice, the better. During that same 2015 to 2022 time period, code enforcement averaged 7 months to close each case. Of these closed cases, code enforcement had closed half of them within 7 weeks. But cases reaching the legal process took a lot longer. Those cases took over 2 years on average to resolve. We found that cases take longer to resolve because of unclear and jargon-filled code enforcement communications and a lack of educational materials for property owners. Community and focus groups told us that property owners and complainants get frustrated and confused reading code enforcement's written materials and end up contacting code enforcement staff directly for clarification. Code enforcement staff then spends a lot of time providing case updates and answering questions that could have been avoided with clearer communication or more robust educational materials. This means code enforcement staff has to spend more time answering questions and less time on their cases, making those cases take longer to close. Now, let me give you some background before I show you this next example. What I'm about to show you is part of a simple letter that the Louisville, Kentucky Code Enforcement Agency sends to property owners after confirming a violation. This part explains next steps to the property owner. As you can see, this excerpt is easy to understand and doesn't rely on technical terms. It gives property owners the information they need simply and quickly. Now compare this with King County's letter giving similar information. I know this is a lot of text and I don't expect you to read it all, but this letter gives property owners a similar amount of information, but it relies on technical terms, which you can see highlighted here, and requires a high reading comprehension level. Research shows that property owners receiving letters like this one are less likely to resolve violations on their own and pay their fines on time than if they'd gotten the simple letter like Louisville's in the previous slide. That's why we recommend that code enforcement simplify violation letters to use county plain language guidance, update and send educational materials to property owners with violations, and publish an FAQ to help property owners find answers to common code questions. We also found that code enforcement's data system is difficult to use and unhelpful to staff. The data system isn't configured to track case progress, forcing officers to manage their own case deadlines and forcing leadership to manage caseloads without accurate data about officer time. Due to this poor system setup, code enforcement officers have to spend extra time putting case data into the system instead of conducting inspections. The current system setup also doesn't let code enforcement staff put data directly into the system while in the field. Officers have to take notes during inspections, but then can't enter them into the system until they return to their desk. This duplicated work increases the time spent on data entry and reduces time available to conduct inspections. We also found that case data is incomplete and inconsistent. For example, almost 1/5 of cases opened from 2015 to 2022 still don't have a priority assigned. As a result, code enforcement does not know the full profile of the case backlog. This and other incomplete and inconsistent data prevent management from using data to make strategic decisions to reduce the case backlog. To address these issues, we recommend that code enforcement update data entry policies to include fields necessary for case and program management, ensure staff can enter data from the field, and create policies to ensure timely case prioritization. Now, to summarize our findings. First, code enforcement's growing backlog includes high-risk cases. Second, the current case prioritization scheme doesn't effectively make use of code enforcement's resources. Third, a lack of clear communication and available information for property owners slows the enforcement process. And finally, current data systems are inefficient and ineffective for both staff and managers. And with that, I'd like to thank you for listening and invite you to see the full report on the Auditor's Office website. There's a lot more in the report than in this presentation, and we'd love for you to take a look.